when I first met you, what really struck me was that the way you started your jewellery business was so unique. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I suppose I'm a bit of a, I was trying to think about this question because it's such a hard one to answer. I'm a bit of an accidental designer. It was not my intention or my ambition to be a jewellery designer. I think when I was young, I mean, I'm going to go into the long version about how this started, but basically, when I was young, I was very fortunate to have a mother who loved to travel. And so I think that the influences of early childhood travel can't be kind of emphasized enough, because although people are always telling me my children will not remember being in India at 5 or 6 or anywhere else they've been, I think it kind of, you know, these experiences and the sensations and the emotions attached to being in other parts of the world and seeing the way other people live their lives and other environments, I think it sort of seeps into the cells, and it may not consciously remain there, but you know, subconsciously this sense of being familiar with other worlds is quite an important one, and as I said, for me, incredibly influential. So I was lucky to have a mother who enjoyed adventuring, and this led me to kind of, as I grew, an interest in human rights, because I think I started to see, as young children do, observe everything, you know, sort of different inequalities in places I was visiting, whether it was East Africa or Asia.
Well, were you visiting as a tourist, Pippa, or what?
Yeah, I mean, there were some places where we had family, like in East Africa, or other places, going to a wedding in Turkey, and rural Turkey, and just kind of different little experiences, but just having a sense that there were different realities, and being very interested in how other people saw the world, how their experiences were. And this led me to an interest in human rights, which I went on to study anthropology, and then did a master's in medical anthropology.
Where did you do anthropology?
I did anthropology at SOAS. Sorry, not at SOAS, at Goldsmiths.
At Goldsmiths, okay.
London, and then an MA at SOAS.
So SOAS is the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is
exactly
part of the University of London and hugely respected for its very niche subjects, right?
Exactly. I mean, particularly specializing in languages and things, but I ended up doing medical anthropology there, which sounds a peculiar kind of trajectory, which it was, but I was interested in mental illness, and I was interested in how different cultures look at normal and abnormal forms of behavior, at healing systems, at the way we look at death or the body. And these were, I found very interesting, but it was also, it led me into looking at how other cultures saw their rights, or how things like biodiversity and cultural rights, all these kind of areas. So I kind of went off in a tangent that was...
So from what it sounds like to me, it's like not just a deep interest, but an academic interest in humankind.
Exactly. I think fundamentally a fascination with people. And for part of my thesis, I went to Borneo, to Sarawak, and I was doing a study that was to do with the concepts of mental health there, but at the same time I was doing some work with some NGOs, local and some here in England, on deforestation. So looking at how it was impacting communities, how the removal of communities from their land in order to clear a cut or for oil palm, how this was impacting people and what they were doing to protest and protect their land. So it was kind of a moment where I felt, this is probably by then my early to mid-20s, this kind of enormous sense of having a purpose in the world, a reason to be in the world. It was kind of an amazingly full time, because I just suddenly realized this was the most extraordinary battle, if you like, a kind of David and Goliath. There was, you know, these small communities of quite traditional peoples in rainforest areas, wherever, who were sort of fighting huge corporations that were intent on kind of removing them and ideally destroying them in a way, because at that time that was how...
and you were there in the middle of all of this, Pippa, as a total stranger. Pippa, can I ask you something? Someone's just commented that if you could tilt your phone down slightly, because you're covered by the text. Oh, wow. You have a...
It might not stay, but... yeah, so it's kind of how I got into working with different communities. And from there, I also started to see that there were many communities who were asking for help to sell things. So they might be making baskets, they might be making weavings, they might have been working in different materials. But one of the things they were saying is, you know, we don't have a market, we need to sell these, can you help us? And so I started to see slowly that maybe there was a way of combining the kind of areas of my interest in that I had just as a kind of hobby in design and in stones. And
so you had an interest in design and
well,
before.
I can't say I really had an interest in design. I'm just going to ask one favor. Mac, could you close the door, please? Thank you very much. It's just the building outside. No, I didn't really have an interest in design. I have to say that's absolutely untrue. But I did have an interest in stones because
okay.
I'm going to show you an example of a stone I was looking at earlier. So this is a pebble. That,
you bring it closer, Pippa.
Yeah. So it's a pebble, a common beach pebble that I found when I was 8 years old. On a beach in Corfu. And this is the year my father passed away. So it was quite a big year for me and a very difficult one. And this pebble I picked up on the beach, and it just took on, it is a common pebble, there's nothing extraordinary about it. But for me, it took on an enormous meaning. It was something that I carried around with me for years, and now I still have it, as you can see. It became a little talisman for me. It felt something very, it's soft and pink, and it sort of seemed to represent to me something in my childlike mind that was very comforting. I don't know how else to put it. It was sort of, it felt like with this I felt stronger, and I've carried it with me, and then I set it in gold so I can wear it when I need to. But this is kind of a little bit my interest in stones. It's sort of rocks that I put out, some rocks that might be quite unusual, like what do I have?
But Pippa, going back to this transition from medical anthropology, is that right?
Yes. So from medical anthropology, I started to work with local NGOs in Borneo.
Okay, so medical anthropology's lost, jewellery's gained.
Moved into more human rights. And then from there, worked with local NGOs, a bit in Borneo, a bit in Thailand, and just started to understand what this kind of growing movement was of indigenous and tribal communities for their rights, basically looking at their rights to land, their rights to their culture, self-determination. And I just found it completely inspiring to see. Quite often it was predominantly women actually working in this area, and to see them risking their lives very often, because governments are incredibly hostile to these movements, and certainly at that time they were. Anything to do with environment or human rights is seen as quite threatening. And I just found this an incredibly inspiring movement, which it still is, and it's grown in so many different ways, and there's so many achievements in the struggle, but it's still one that continues to be.
So at what point, Pippa, did you make the connection between their jewellery making skills?
Well, that was it. I started to, when I was working in Borneo, I started to see that people were looking for markets and outlets to markets. So I remember bringing back and selling to Body Shop, I think at the time, loads of hand woven baskets that were to be worn on the back that they would traditionally use. But always finding this.
So was that Anita?
Yes.
Right. Yes. Oh wow. Okay. I didn't realize there was a connection.
Yeah, but sort of seeing that there were kind of gaps between what people wanted here and what people were making there, or what people there felt people here might want. And there was just a little a gap that I felt perhaps this is an area where I could find to be a little useful. So I started to work with the Bushmen. I think that was the first project in Botswana. Jewellery that was using the traditional ostrich eggshell beads that they made, but putting gold beads in between, or just kind of taking what they did traditionally and working with them to create something a little bit different that might appeal to this market that started with the Bushman project, which was thanks to Rebecca Hossack that I went to work there. And I went over 2 summers. The first summer I found incredibly difficult. It was in this community there was a lot of HIV and AIDS. They were and still are, it was very poor. But there is this arts project, and in the arts project brought creativity, it brought self-respect, it brought joy, it brought sense of accomplishment, and a sense that the work they were producing was being sold in another part of the world and people were recognizing it and their story. With my nephew, we made a little film to show, we projected on the wall of Rebecca's gallery to show who these people were, the sound of their click language, the landscape where the works came from. So it wasn't just kind of ethnic stuff from Africa. It was like these people, this place, this country, and this is what they've made, and this is what they do traditionally, but this is how we've kind of made it more contemporary or made it perhaps a little more unusual to fit another kind of market.
And so you started with that through your work as an anthropologist, then you started this project, and then you became a jeweler. So how long did that happen? And
this is probably about 20 years ago. I mean, it all happened quite quickly. There was sort of, I was very excited because at that time, 20 years ago, there was a sort of beginning of an interest in the provenance of things, where things came from, who made them, why they made them. These questions were starting to be asked. And I felt there was potential. So the things I'd loved doing, which was childhood, kind of collecting beads and buttons and things that I would find around the house and making bracelets. This is something I'd been doing for years and years. And I started to see maybe there was a way of working with the communities, creating jewellery and taking it all. It was sort of slightly organically happening, but it did.
Organic is a word I would use for you, Pippa.
It wasn't
the original
business plans or 5-year plans or anything like that. It was kind of rolling from idea to idea, but it was definitely a turning point, I think, in consumer relationships with objects. And it seemed, you know, if we could make jewellery in areas basically where there may be vulnerability through poverty, or because of war, or because of climate change, or all of the issues that we face, that if there were people there with skills or interest in learning to have those skills with training projects, that it just seemed like a fantastic way to create jewellery, particularly drawing on each different place I've worked, drawing on their particular skills or their traditions. So it was kind of slowly, it was put together in this way of, as I kind of worked with different communities, I'd either get invited to come work somewhere, or I would find a community who I thought were particularly interesting and who made really beautiful things, like the Kuna Indians in Panama, who make beautiful gold jewelry, or the Mapuche in Chile, or where the jewelry for both those communities is an incredibly important cultural flag, if you like. It's a symbol of their identity. To wear the jewelry for them is very much a political thing, really. It's to say we are Mapuche or Kuna, and it's very much around their resistance, I suppose, in a sense. Yeah. So working with them was very interesting. And then sorry.
Carry on.
I'm losing my train of thought. Then about 12 years ago, I started partnering up a little bit with Turquoise Mountain, which is a charity I've now, for 12 years been working with. Yes.
This is an example.
And they're an amazing organization started by Prince Charles that in a way brings together all these threads, because his belief that culture, tradition, heritage, craft, skills are all really vital things in the part of what makes us human. It's about our creativity. It's about creativity as a kind of as a psychological tool, as something that gives us a sort of a peace and a sense of being in the moment. It's as an economic tool. Obviously, it brings jobs hugely in Asia and Africa. Craft is a big earner. And it's something that defines you as a collective, as a community. And I think he saw the vitalness of all these components. And in 2006, Prince Charles and Hamid Karzai, who was then leader of Afghanistan, put together the idea of an organization that was fronted by Rory Stewart that would look at craft in Afghanistan. So 2001, obviously, you know, things in Afghanistan had changed a lot, but by 2006, when they started this, Afghanistan was starting to open up, and there was a possibility to start working with artisans, finding and identifying people who may have been out of work for decades, but who had great skills, and helping to create a school for this craft where these people can become teachers. And it's an amazing achievement what they've done there. And now they're in that kind of gosh, there's a 3-year course that the students do, and to learn whether it's calligraphy or miniature painting, jewellery, woodwork, kind of traditional Afghan skills. But then, so the young learn these skills, and then Turquoise Mountain helps to mentor them to start their own business, or to work with international designers like myself to help kind of create new markets and open things up. I think since...
And Pippa, for those watching who don't know you that well, can you show us the style of your jewellery? I know that you're usually a walking mannequin.
Got a bit on. The style of jewellery is quite organic. It's quite it's using sometimes quite rough stones, or sort of organically tumbled, river tumbled feeling stones. I quite like to leave the stones transformed. It's like it's just enhancing what's naturally there. So for example, this is a piece of uncut crystals on gold beads.
Can you
so
hold it a little bit? That's a little bit closer maybe. Okay,
so
yeah.
Piece, or let's see, this one is a tumbled amethyst, so it's kind of uneven, unsymmetrical, organic.
Wow.
This one is a piece that's using sugilite, which is a South African purple stone, but it has a kind of gold charm of a flower in there, and then different tumbles of the stone or flat cuts. So it's quite, just looking at the rings and things, they're again uneven, rough, but these are opals, and these ones are emeralds, and even the diamond is an uncut diamond here. So it's quite, and here I have more uncut stones.
And can I see those rings again, Pippa, if you hold them up like that? I mean, let everyone take a good look at those, because that is quite something to look at, isn't it?
Yeah, so the jewelry is, but then it depends where I'm working. So in Afghanistan, for example, we try to create designs that are very much based from either Islamic or Central Asian, or particular to ethnic groups like Pashtun or Hazara, or one group within Afghanistan. So it very much reflects the place. I think that's really important. So in your necklace, we've used a lot of the hexagons, so very tile inspired, Islamic tile inspired, obviously using a lot of lapis lazuli, which is the Afghan stone. So it's kind of each project,
you can see.
each project, depending where I'm working, whether it's now more recently in obviously Afghanistan, but Myanmar, Jordan, Bolivia, as well as India. When I'm working in a place, I try very much to do a lot of research around the culture of the place. So historical research, contemporary research, look at what people are wearing, look at what's for sale in the markets, see what textiles hold, what ceramics hold, what architecture, paint, and just kind of find threads of, you know, what colors mean, what shapes mean things, and then kind of create collections that are very much inspired by that place, so that
Right.
the artisans are part of it. It's their culture, it's their history, and they're creating things drawn from it. But
you also do your own designs, Pippa, don't you? Independently of your...
Yeah, so I also work and have worked in India for over 25 years, a long time. And there I worked very much, again, very nature inspired. So this piece, for example, is just a collection of, but you can see a lot of seeds and nuts and gourds.
Great, can you just hold that up a bit close and hold it? Just let everyone take a good look at that. That's perfect.
Or for example, I was just looking now, these seeds which I found on the floor in Amman, where someone had been eating pumpkin seeds. So I have some seeds here, for example, right there.
Oh, those are real pumpkin seeds.
And then we've made them in gold. Or I was looking at something I did just recently in India, which was the children found this beautiful seed in the garden. It's just,
what kind of seed is that?
I don't know. It's just kind of an amazing shape, and I just thought it was beautiful. It's quite like an animal almost.
Yeah.
Anyway, and Om Prakash, who I work with, who's a stone cutter, made this beautiful, in onyx, this beautiful seed from it.
Oh,
So
wow.
he's carved the stone. I think that's just beautiful myself. So kind of all the pieces are very nature inspired, looking at flowers and natural forms of leaves and plants and fruits, and then kind of the stones are tumbled in.
And the settings are all sort of rub over settings. You don't use
Exactly.
floors or pave or anything like that.
No, and we do as little casting as possible. I mean, one of the things that's come through from working in so many different places is, you know, the need for jobs. So I try and do everything as kind of manual and handmade as possible. So handmade chain, for example, that's in Afghanistan or in Nairobi where I used to work. You know, it means that you can even farm out the chain work. Women can do it at home in Kabul, for example, and in Nairobi, the project I was working with, they farmed out that work to the villagers who were, I was working in a slum area, but the villagers were considered even more needy than the slum dwellers. So the work would go out there. So, you know, they could make meters of chain, but it requires handwork. And so I try and do everything as, none of the stones are cut in any way that's castable, because they're all hand cut and they're all different sizes and shapes and forms, and so all the gold work has to be done around those stones by hand.
Yeah, and it's a very, very unique look, and so interesting that it grew out of your interest in helping people in difficult situations. And the way that you always wear that big bracelet is always fascinating. Tell me a bit about that, Pippa, because you always wear that.
The shell has been on since I was 24, I think. And this goes back to when I was working in Borneo. I heard about an NGO in Thailand that was run by a Naga human rights activist. He was a refugee in Thailand, and he was running an organization that was for indigenous people throughout Asia. So I went to work for him, and I guess like all refugees, you know, home becomes this sort of almost mythical place that I used to hear every evening. We'd have a story about his village, and it was a very traditional community in the northeast part of India on the border with Burma, where he came from.
Okay.
And I would hear about the characters in the village or people's different animals, this methane, this buffalo from that family. And it would just, his home just kind of seeped into my consciousness as this incredible place. And I eventually, when his sister was getting married, I got permission to go to this area, because it's, at the time you needed a special permit, because it's actually, there's a conflict going on. The Nagas, some of the Nagas want independence from India. So there's been an armed movement there since India's independence, actually. So many, many decades. And so it took a special permit and permission to go up to his village. But I did eventually get there. He wasn't able to go home, but I was able to go meet his mother and his family. But the reason why I wear this bracelet, which is a Naga bracelet, by the way.
Okay.
The reason is because having been to his village and things, it was, he himself, he's now a refugee in Canada, but was my mentor. He's like an extraordinary person coming from a tiny village in these foothills, so far away from his home. He was someone who just loves humanity, all people, and interested in everything and everyone. And he was such an incredible person to spend time with and work for. And he was a huge inspiration. So somehow the shell, even though it's large and lumpy, it has not been off my wrist for decades and decades. And it sort of feels slightly like a shell that kind of protects you, like you're sort of safe in your shell, and slightly it reminds me of him. And yeah, and it's kind of, I just couldn't be without it now. Wow. I just took it off when I had the babies, but other than that, it's been on.
Wow. And Pippa, so when somebody, because you've got a shop in Notting Hill, when somebody comes to buy something from you, I would imagine that each of those jewels has a story. Like you were just telling me that the chains are made by the villagers,
yeah.
They're set by somebody else. So, well, when people come, are they interested in the stories, or do they come because they like the look? What's the narrative of somebody who walks your boutique?
I think, I mean, part of of what we're trying to do is really spread the message about ethical jewelry and what that is and what it, you know, it's quite a broad area, and it can be anything from, in my mind, it can be anything from ensuring people have a safe and sustainable job, as in Afghanistan or in Myanmar, or it can be about the actual sourcing of the materials. So in Bolivia, for example, we've worked for years with what was the first certified fair trade gold mine called Cotopaxi, and subsequently with Yani, which is now certified as fair mined. So that's knowing that this gold is clean and comes, we know exactly the mine, we know the goldsmith we work with in La Paz, and that's kind of one side of it. The other side, as I said, is about sustainable jobs and about keeping traditional skills alive and traditions and ensuring, for example, now we're working in Jordan with Syrian refugees with Turquoise Mountain, and that's something where some of the women who've been learning goldsmithing from Syria, they've said things like, you know, learning to make something and the process of making and being in this workshop and in a team and things, it's the first time they've been happy in 9 years. So I think there's something about our customers who they're very interested in those stories and the fact that there's a kind of well, a story behind the pieces, and there's a face behind the pieces. We know who made each piece and where and why. And then other people who are, I think, honestly just drawn to the aesthetic, who just quite like the sort of free and organic feel of the jewelry and don't necessarily need or want to know who made it or why. So I think there's a bit of a mixture, but generally I think people are drawn to this kind of the stance of the ethos of the company.
Wow, and whether you know anything about the company or not, if you go into the shop and the bright colours, and there's a real sort of joy about your jewellery, and that's lovely to hear that it's infused at every step of the way. It's not just because somebody designed something, sent it off to be made, then it arrived in a box and was put in a window. Everything has an incredible story and a journey.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I love the most, is I've spent time sitting in mud huts in Kibera with artisans in some in Nairobi. I've spent time in a shipping container in Kabul with artisans sitting on the carpet talking about things, or in India or in Myanmar. But it's kind of, it's the getting to know the artisans, to me, is a huge part of it. Is you have a genuine relationship with the people you work with, which is years and years of friendship too. It's not just here's the design, this is what we're going to work on. It's about, you know, knowing about each other's lives and families, hearing a lot about, you know, the situation in the country. So in Kabul, for example, the situation has deteriorated so much in the last few years, and people feel they want to talk to someone from the outside world and explain what the situation's like. So in many of these places, I feel part of my role is to just listen to stories and hear what people's experiences are. So
how do you have time to do all this, Pippa, and run a successful company?
Teamwork.
Teamwork.
Fantastic team here in London. But
wow, it's so inspiring. And I can see lots of questions popping up, but I'm wondering from the last few minutes, anybody has a question. I know a lot of people have been saying they love your work, Pippa, they're so inspired. So if anybody has a question, I'll read it out as we carry on chatting. Pippa, you're telling me a bit about a project you're working on at the moment with a bracelet.
Yeah. But we had, as I said, we've been working in Afghanistan for quite a number of years. So that entails my going out for short spells to work in Kabul with the artisans. And someone who we liaise with and helps us a lot in logistics and translations and everything is a man called Mohammedullah. And he sent some photographs last week of he and Fawad, who part owns the workshop, had gone out and bought basic stores of onions, cooking oil, potatoes, rice, and were distributing it to families they knew were in desperate need with the lockdown. And we were kind of, so we created a bracelet that we will give 100% of the profits to him to help feed families, because he is there and he has gloves and a mask, but they're going and delivering food to families who have no means.
Okay, yeah. Someone's got a question for you, Pippa. Are you working on any new pieces while in lockdown? Good question.
Isn't it? Because I must say, it's been an interesting, the first few weeks I thought there was such a kind of level of anxiety and fear and confusion and shock that I realized I was not going to be creative at all. And I thought, oh, this time, you know, we have time for once to, you know, uninterrupted. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to do anything. I just cannot bring my mind to a place of calm enough to even think about it. And I didn't look at books, I didn't look at the stones, I just was in a kind of I don't know, free fall. But now the weeks passed and I'm just now starting to feel ready to, in fact, I started looking and thinking about new designs just literally the last week, I would say. I think before that, I don't know, it just didn't feel, there was just no space.
Okay, yeah, difficult. Someone just asked, any advice for an ethical jewellery firm that launched a few months ago?
Oh no, what a time to launch. Wow.
Well, overwhelming question.
I think getting through this period is going to be challenge number one, because I think all of us who are in retail and making and designing, I mean, it's pretty frozen. I mean, our shops are closed. Our website is still going, which is fantastic, but it's a difficult time for anyone in retail. So I think the kind of first thing is use this time, I guess, to plot and build and to kind of understand how your business is going to work and what the ethical elements are and how you want to work them, and then maybe the strategy, how you're going to sell, how you're going to, is it online?
I would add in, make sure you've got a digital element, because
Absolutely.
I mean, with a spanner in the works like this, and many people's lifeline is their e-commerce, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Very good. There's another question, maybe one last one. People, what is your favorite stone? Horrible question. Catherine, but thank you for asking.
My favorite anything I find really difficult. But I think I would probably say it's rock crystal, just looking in front of me. You know, just this one, for example, has prisms in it. I don't know, they can't really be seen. Rainbows of prisms. And I think there's just something about crystal that it's not hugely valuable, it's not rare, you find it all over the world, but it's just such a beautiful material, the internal life of it, or the clarity of it. I don't know, maybe rock crystal.
Okay, that's interesting, because you're so much about colour, yet
Colour,
rock crystal
is
colourless.
Yeah, I think it's something beautiful about it.
Great, well, we made our half hour, Pippa, our first ever. Well done, and thank you so much for everybody who's watching, listening, sending questions. I'm going to save this and put it on IGTV so we can all watch it later. And just thank you, Pippa, for your time and your amazing work, which I think has inspired many people, and I'm sure will continue to.
Thank you.
You keep well, Pippa.
You too.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.